Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here. If you're not one of the people speaking, please mute yourselves. We're looking forward to hearing from Stu Strumwasser today. Stu is a great friend of Brandjectory, and a really great guy. I imagine this will have a little bit of humor. I'm building him up here because he tends to be a funny guy. But I think we're going to learn a lot, and I think this is really something that you'll all want to pay attention to. We will record this. We will send it out later. Please, if you have questions, put them in the Q&A. Stu's going to talk for about 45 minutes or so. Michael and I and Susan will monitor the questions. If we see something that is pertinent to what Stu is discussing, we'll kind of interrupt as least rudely as we possibly can. But other than that, it's going to be Stu's show, and we'll take the questions at the end. So I see a lot of people we know on the line. Welcome to all of you. Thank you for being here. And of course, if you have any questions about Brandjectory, reach out to Michael or myself. We're always happy to answer those. So with that, I am going to turn it over to Stu. Stu, you should be able to share your screen. And I look forward to hearing everything that you have to talk about.
Okay, well, first of all, just thank you so much, Tom and Michael and Susan, for having me. I am a big fan of Brandjectory. Mike and Tom called me to get my opinion on this before they even started it, and I thought it was great. And it's awesome to see so much traction with all of these really cool brands and businesses that are using Brandjectory, and it's become the hub and like community that you guys thought, which I think is just awesome. Congratulations on that. I am going to talk for not for 45 minutes, but for a little less, and hopefully we'll get to your questions and we'll have a conversation. Tom introduced me as being a funny guy. I'll try to, keep things lively. My hope when I go to see a seminar or a speech, my hope is that, if I could leave here today with one great, idea that I didn't have, one new idea, then it was worth my time. So I'm hoping that I can impart, one great idea or more to those of you who are watching today. And if we can have a laugh or two along the way, that'd be great too, because it should be fun. So let me just try to move through this deck. This is who I am. I spent 15 years working at big Wall Street firms where I sold investments, and then I quit. And I started a natural soda company. So I do know the pain that some of you are feeling. I assume that there's a bunch of food and beverage startups on this call, and maybe is also from some other consumer verticals. I ran Snow Beverages for 6 years, raised millions of dollars from early stage financing. So I know how to do this stuff for other people, but I've also done it for myself. And we had a product that was in thousands of stores, and the brand did not make it. And after 6 years of struggling, I finally gave up, and we shut down, dissolved the company. And I started Green Circle about 10 years ago. But the important thing to know is, like all of you, I know what it's like to start a business in your garage at night, on nights and weekends, and to struggle and to go through all the difficulty in trying to get, to turn an idea into money. Unlike all the other bankers in this space, I actually had a real job once. So I know what that feels like. I know what it is, to be exhilarated when you go into the office in the morning and you can't believe that this is your job because it's so cool. And I also know what it's like to be down to your last couple of $1,000 on a Friday and have to make payroll. So we definitely have some understanding of that, and I hope that I'll be able to share some insights that are helpful. Let's talk about money, because when I talk to startups, I often get lengthy pitches about their product, and they want to tell me about a whole bunch of different things and why they're the great CEO. But this is the key question, right? If 90-something% of startups ultimately fail when they run out of capital, shouldn't what we're talking about today be like the number one concern for the CEO or founder of an early stage company? Well, the answer is it should, right? And you guys, anyone on this call, you were, wise enough or advised enough to say that you knew that, right? And you joined Brandjectory, and you carved out 45 minutes from your busy lives to listen to me and to Tom and Mike a little bit today. because you recognize that, but this is really critical. The CEO of an early stage company, your number one job is raising money. Um, Moving on. So when you think about, how much money to raise and what is needed, I often get asked, how much capital should we be raising, right? The answer is the right amount is not too much, not too little, right? We ideally advise people that you want to think about it in terms of runway. So you back into how much money do I need by saying, okay, over the next, let's say 18 to 24 months, at least 18 months, right? What are the goals that we want to accomplish so that we can show that the business has progressed and that we've achieved milestones that have created value, so that when we go to the next investors in 18 months, 24 months, we can say to them, we know how to create value. We're good stewards of other people's capital. 18 months ago, we raised whatever it was, $1 million, and we had some goals and we achieved some of them and we didn't achieve some others, but we did achieve some and we created some value. We could do the same thing now with your money, right? So you think about, what are the milestones that you want to achieve that will help, really create value in your business? How much would that cost? That's your budget, right? Now you back into a use of funds. Okay, so this is where the money would go. But the big thing that I want to impart to all the founders and owners of companies today is, when you figure out what that number is, shoot for a little more. We're in a difficult market now, so it's probably not something I have to convince people of. But, market cycle, when we're in a good market again and it's easier to raise capital, I'm amazed by founders and CEOs who want to take less than they could get because they're worried about the dilution. One of my favorite lines is, nobody ever went out of business because of dilution. But everyone on this webinar today who ends up failing, and some of you will, it's going to be because you ran out of money. So if you have an opportunity to raise a little bit more, don't worry about the dilution. Get that cash in the bank. You need it. There are three big elements that will lead to success in an early stage capital raise, and they're listed here on this very white, empty slide. And by the way, if you're thinking about making a deck, you should think about how to use less words, not more, in your deck. But the earlier the stage of development of the company, the more that you're relying on networking and relationships. These elements are true even for advanced Series C investments with experienced professional investors writing $100 million checks. But it's magnified at the earlier stage you go. You have to build trust. Remember that emotional motivators matter, and I'll come back to this. Greed and fear are the two things that advertising agencies, try to manipulate us with. And you should be using those as tools with your investors. And creating urgency in your capital raise is really critical also. You have to be able to frame a timeline around that capital raise, or you'll never get to a closing. What you'll get to is interest. I always say that raising money is kind of like football and its red zone. Getting down to the 10-yard line or the 1-yard line is not most of the effort. It's actually the least part of it. It's getting it from I'm interested to I just wired. It's those last stages that are the hard part. We'll talk about this more. But let me just first talk about, what are the materials that you need for to conduct a capital raise. And some of you in the audience, this. You may have raised money before. You may have had companies before. You might have been much more successful than I was. My startup failed. Some of you, this may be completely new to, so I'm speaking to everyone. And if this is remedial, bear with me. Basically, you need an investor presentation, right? Whoops. Hold on, guys. You need an investor presentation, or what we might sometimes call a SIM, a confidential investor memorandum. Let me talk about that first. The biggest mistake made in creating a SIM, and I do these for a living, is making it too long. If you think about it in your email box, if you get an attachment that is 30, 50, 80 slides, even if it's something that you find to be extremely interesting and compelling, what you're likely to do is to say, you know, this looks really cool, but it's a lot of information. I'll come back to this when I have time. And then you'll find that those are the emails that show up on the list when you're doing your catch up in email on a Sunday afternoon when you have a little time, and you find yourself deleting tons of emails that have been sitting there for 60 days. That's what happens to long decks when you send them to investors. I'm telling you, the shorter, the better, and the less words on the page, the better. And you have to remember that a deck or an investor presentation, no one in the history of investing has ever read a sim or a deck and then wired money, right? It's just a tool, and it's part of a sales process funnel, and it's going to get you to a call or a meeting. That's where the real selling takes place. So you don't have to get every last little detail about how great you and your business are into that deck. You just have to get enough in there to get the meeting. And frankly, since you're going to have to sell in a meeting or on a phone call, if every single good thing about your business was already in the deck, you've left yourself with nothing new to add. You know, so make that deck shorter and go through the pain of editing yourself. It's hard to cut it down because you love your business and there's so much you want to tell them. It's got to be shorter. You also need a summary or a teaser, and that should be 1 or 2 pages. At Green Circle, we frequently sell companies that are worth 20, 50, $100 million. We raise 10, $20 million for growth stage companies, and we send out teasers that are 1 page, usually. The other thing you need is a detailed financial model, and there's some leeway here. If it's an early stage company, it doesn't have to look like a spreadsheet that could, you know, work to launch the space shuttle. But the more professional that model can look, the more, you know, it's going to be helpful. And that's a great place also to get help if you're not, you know, from financial training. And if that isn't your strength, that's a good place to look for some help from somebody like Brandjectory or from a consultant. You know, you can get a really acceptable, you know, kind of professional financial model made for a reasonable amount of money. Anything else, like if you have a marketing plan or a lengthy document that you think investors should see, please consider it supplemental, hold it back, and don't send it to them all at once. Get them interested with a teaser. Once they're interested, send them the deck, have a conversation. And at any point along the way, you could then offer additional information, sometimes in response to requests, but you don't dump it on them all at once. But what it is information overload. It's actually going to cause them to, you know, to get less interested, not more. So let's go back and talk a little bit about these elements, you know, that help kind of get people interested and convert interest into actual investments. I've found over the last 33 years in selling investments that with early stage deals, or if you're dealing with angels, relationship is everything. And what I always teach people is you want to go to 2 degrees of separation, and you want to broaden your universe of potential investors that way, but you don't want to go much further, or you're probably out fishing, right? So you want to rely on your network as much as possible. And what I always say to folks is, you know, if you don't have a lot of, you know, wealthy people in your network, that's okay. And this is something that we talk about in venture capital a lot now. Starting a company shouldn't only be for someone who's already rich or comes from a rich community. Anyone can start a company, and anyone can raise angel money, even if they don't have that network. What you want to do is ask your network who they know who could be a potential investor for an angel transaction. And having that mutual friend the connector, vouch for you as the founder or CEO is huge. You know, with angel investments, if it's 25, 50, $100,000 coming from, you know, wealthy, but not incredibly wealthy, high net worth individuals, often I went to college with Susan and she was always, you know, really bright and hardworking. That's 50% of the pitch. You know, I used to work with Joe over at, you know, X big company, and he had this idea and he quit and he started this company. But, you know, when we worked together, he was always the one guy I knew I could always rely on, always latest guy at the office. That's a really big deal to angel investors because they're not going to study every single aspect of your business or industry. But if someone they trusts you, that's a really big deal. Okay. And if you're going out to 6 degrees of separation, that's a great way to meet Kevin Bacon, but it may not be something that you can lean on, right? In terms of leveraging the relationship. Moving on, when I talk about skin in the game, if you are able to bootstrap your company, you should. It's the right way to do it for 2 reasons. Number one, whenever you're raising capital, you want to advance the business as much as you can before you go and ask for third-party capital, because you'll be able to justify, you'll generate more interest, but you'll also, bless you, from the audience, but you'll also be able to justify a better valuation. The other thing is, it's a big signal, you know, to other investors. You want my money, but this wasn't good enough for your own, right? Now, if you don't have any money, that's fine, right? You can only do what you can do. And, you know, I was in wealth management for a long time. Wealth, investment, capital, it's all relative too. You know, if you're a young person and you don't have a lot of money, but you put in the first $5,000 to start this company, well, that mattered to you, that $5,000, that matters to investors. For me, I quit a Wall Street job. I put the first $100,000 into my company. When I burned through it, I took 100,000 from my dad and my brother, and then I went out to raise outside capital. And they knew, you know, that I believed in what I was doing, that I was committed. Okay. And the last thing is, for those of you who don't know the story of Cortez, he was not a nice guy. He wasn't particularly nice to the native people when he landed, but he came from Europe in a few ships, and then they landed on the beach, and he turned to his, you know, soldiers, his sailors, and he said to them, he burned his ships, and he said to them, look back, that's the ship that brought you here. There is no path back. You better fight hard if we encounter any problems. Like Cortez, you know, you need to burn your ships. If you're asking someone to give you their hard-earned money, 25, 50, 100 grand, $1 million more, you need to demonstrate that you're committed, right? How can you do that if you still have a full-time job, right? So it's perfectly cool to start a company in your garage on nights and weekends. But when you're going to go ask third-party investors to give meaningful dollars to this company, you need to be able to demonstrate that you're all in. When it comes to finding investors, what you're looking at here is a picture of a bunch of penguins. On CNBC, they used to always talk about the penguins. As soon as JP Morgan downgraded a stock, all the other penguins jump in the water once the first one does. And they would, the guys on CNBC would go, oh, here goes Merrill Lynch. They downgraded it too. You know, here goes Smith Barney. What's really important to understand is what it says here in the first bullet point: money follows money. The best part of your pitch is going to be telling people that other folks are already in, because that means anyone who's capable of writing a $50,000, $100,000 check, $1 million check, there's a good chance that they're a smart, successful person, or that they know a few smart, successful persons who advise them, right? So that kind of validation is important to investors. So the key for you is getting your first investor, or what we call a lead, right? Getting that first person over the goal line usually opens, you know, that breaks the ice and leads to, it gets easier and easier as you start to accumulate additional commitments. Just a couple of other random points here about finding investors. Brandjectory could be a place to find investors, and I'll come back to that. But as you go through your daily life in networking, you should always be on the lookout. You know, is this someone who could potentially be an investor? Or is this someone who, I wonder if this person works with anyone or is in this, you know, social circle with anyone or at this university with anyone who maybe could be potential investors for us. Bullet point number 3. I don't know exactly who I'm talking to today, but I look forward to seeing you all. It's hard to try to tell jokes to an audience that I can't see. But I think that if you're all on the Brandjectory platform, that your early stage companies trying to raise, you know, a few $100 grand, a few $1 million type of deals. If that, am I wrong, Mike? Oh, I am. I'm right. Okay. I thought you gave me this, like you were giving me the no, you're wrong signal. Thank you. So if that's the case, my advice to you folks is don't waste a lot of time with venture capital firms, and particularly not right now. It's a tough market. VCs don't say no. Oh, you're recording this, Michael? Okay. So VCs are all my favorite people and all my best friends. I spend my day pitching these people. Actually, in the food and beverage world, 9 out of 10 venture capitalists surveyed happen to be lovely folks. You don't go into the natural product space if you're a jerk. There's other industries where you can make more money. And most of the folks that I pitch all day are great. They care about these brands. They care about the environment and the benefits to human health and to climate, you know, fighting climate change, but they're not going to invest in your company. And I want you to remember that they don't say no. There's no benefit to them to say no. They'll always leave the door open. So I'm constantly having early stage brands tell me, oh, I met with ABC Venture Fund and they said they're really interested and they want to talk to me in 6 months. That doesn't mean anything, right? They'll always say, hey, feel free to keep us updated, whatever. Feel free to talk to them as much as you like, but that's not where you're going to get the money at this stage. So I would focus in on where your actionable leads are, because your time is so important. Angel groups, by the way, that's kind of a hybrid sort of in between little VC. Now they will make investments. It's a tough group to pitch to, but I have seen lots of brands where they get it right. They find the right one. They get a commitment. It turns into $1 million or $2 million. That is possible. But again, it's networking. Let's talk about urgency. This is a little more nuanced. And now we're talking about the thing that, you know, they would say is the thing, the most important thing that you're always supposed to be doing in Glengarry Glen Ross, which is you're always be closing. When it comes to closing, you know, you can often start a capital raise and feel really good about yourself because you have a few conversations with investors and they seem really into it. And CEOs and founders are constantly telling their friends and their colleagues and their employees, this group loved me and she thought I was awesome and this guy loved the pitch. And those leads often linger and languish and they don't turn into actual investments because there are other things that have to happen in the funnel after you get them interested enough to read a deck and the deck gets them interested enough to have a call and you kill it on that call, right? Other things still have to happen to convert interest into wires. That's the hard part. So as I say here, first of all, you need to create an environment of competition. And what I once heard another banker say that I thought was really well said is, and in lieu of competition, you want to create the illusion of competition. I'm not talking about lying. Don't ever lie to anybody. But what I am saying is you want to be coy and close to the vest with how it's going and point out that you're talking to other people, right? Because if you want to sell something right, you better have at least 2 or more people who want to buy it, right? And if you ultimately are going to negotiate a deal and you're going to negotiate 2 things, price and control. Even if somebody's making a minority investment, they're going to want certain controls. The way that you retain leverage and you can make a fair deal, is by them thinking that you have options. The way that you get people to close on a reasonable timeline, there's a variety of things that you can do and a variety of different ways that you can do them. But the most standard and simple thing is to use a min-max offering, is the financial engineering term. And that means create a limit to your capital raise, the same as creating a minimum. Now, the minimum is created, and I'm not sure if this is the case on Brandjectory, we'll talk about it, but a minimum is created because that enables you to get your first commitments. Because what investors won't do is commit or even send money to someone until they know that you have other people coming in, so that you have enough money to pay for what you need. As an investor, I don't want to invest in something that's underfunded, right? So if you want to raise $1 million, what I recommend is you set a min-max offering where the minimum to close or break escrow is 500 grand or $750,000. But the maximum, and this is the part that CEOs, founders often, don't really focus on, you also set a maximum, and that might be 1.25 million. Okay, why do we do that? So the minimum is there so that as investors ask you, well, how do I know you're going to have enough money? How do I know anybody else is going to invest? The answer is, it's really easy. Don't worry. I can't take your money until we have $750,000. That's the minimum required to break escrow. Okay. So, and I don't want to get into talking about escrow right now, but you can use escrow to get those checks before the people then decide to build a roller coaster, invest their money elsewhere. But that's probably a conversation for another day and getting into the weeds. The point is, there's a minimum, Mr. Investor, Ms. Investor. You don't have to worry about being the only check. We're not going to take your money until we have enough to achieve our goals, to fund our budget. But the other thing is, there's a maximum. And so every single investor that takes an interest in your deal is going to ask you, so is there a deadline, or when do I have to let you know? Right? And what most CEOs go, well, as soon as possible. And that's not effective in converting interest into a wire, or getting somebody over that goal line. What is effective to say this, or some version of this? Well, look, we don't have a specific deadline, right? But what we have done is committed to the people coming in. We're not going to raise a bunch of additional money that we don't need, which would dilute all of us. So trying to raise $1 million. We have set the maximum at 1.25 million. I will not raise more. What is this? A month from now, I could still be running around, calling people looking for money. But I do have several people right now looking at the deal, any one of whom, if they come in, could close it out. So what I would suggest to you, Mr. Investor, is, if you're not comfortable, if I haven't answered all your questions, I'm not trying to rush you or pressure you. But if you do feel like this could be the right investment for you, then there's no reason to hesitate. And because waiting could cost you an opportunity, right? I'm out there talking to other people. I'm going to do my best to try to get the money as quickly as possible. Today, I have stock available. Tomorrow, I might, but I might not. It's capped at 1.25 million. Yeah, point number 3 is, if you don't defer, well, why? Why would they do that? Just think about it, right? What would you do in the shoes, if you stepped into the shoes of the investor? Investment opportunity, I have risk and reward, right? I have opportunity to make money, get return, to get the other benefits that might be, ancillary benefits, but I have the risk of losing my capital. Well, as long as I have the opportunity, why would I give you my money and risk it, right? I'm only going to give you that money when I know there's now a risk that I'm going to lose the opportunity. So the key word, which many of you are probably thinking about in your heads, is scarcity, right? There has to be some sense of scarcity, that there's a limit on how much stock is available. And that if I don't take action within a reasonable period of time, I could miss the opportunity. And you know what? If I don't care about the opportunity, okay, that's fine. But if I do care, and some people are going to care about your opportunity, some reasonable people may say, you know what? Yeah, I don't want to take a chance of losing this. I think this is cool. I think this guy's great. This woman is impressive. I'm gonna go ahead and, send my funds. Now let's talk about crowdfunding platforms. This is a terrible idea. I'm just kidding. Crowdfunding platforms can be great. They've been done right. They've been done wrong. It's being done right by Susan, Tom, and Michael. And there's a lot of things to like about Brandjectory. In case you guys, if this isn't super obvious, I'm not getting paid to be here today. I'm helping out because they're friends of mine, and I think that they're providing a really cool service. And when I started my company, a lot of incredibly experienced and smart people, much better than me, were really kind to me and helped me and gave me advice. And I always try to, when I have an opportunity to give back and do a little bit of the same, I try to do that. So I'm here at a courtesy to them, but they're doing a lot of things really well. And I like Brandjectory a lot. This idea of building community and offering support and services beyond just the capital raise is very cool. But the big thing that I want to say to you, folks in the audience, is you have to use Brandjectory or any crowdfunding platform as a tool, not as some kind of solution. No one has ever, posted a deck on a crowdfunding platform and then just sat around and collected checks, right? You use it as a tool. You, the CEO, whose number one job is raising capital, you still have to go out and market that deal, right? Now you have a great way to do it, which is less friction because it's on this platform and you have all the tools there and there's a way to take them through the funnel. You still got to go out and generate interest. You got to bring people to your deal, right? That's all. When and how do you set valuation? This is really simple. Don't set valuation, okay? The market will tell you valuation. There's really, well, put it this way, there's risk on either side if you try to set a valuation. If you set it too high, you're going to turn off investors. If you set it too low, you risk leaving money on the table. And it doesn't really matter what you say or what I say. It's only the guy who's got the check who's going to set that valuation. So what you want to do is go back to what I said a few slides ago. Make sure that in your process, you're doing two things: generating excitement and enthusiasm, but number two, creating an environment where there's at least the perception that there's competition for the asset. And then when people ask you, what's the valuation? The answer is, make me an offer. We're looking for a lead investor, okay? Now, that doesn't mean you can't give them guidance, right? We also manage a venture capital fund. We don't invest in consumer products. We invest in technology that's related to the production and distribution of food. But I often ask, founders and CEOs, well, I'm not asking you for a number and I'm not going to hold you to it, but give me a rough ballpark idea of what you think might be fair. I think it is a good idea to say, well, it might be between A and B, because otherwise they don't know that, well, maybe this person's crazy and they're looking for some crazy high number and this could be a waste of my time. But as much as you can avoid, speaking first in a negotiation, the better it will be for you. And it's completely standard and reasonable that a lead investor should make you an offer, and then you can negotiate from there. But remember this, kids, no one ever went out of business due to dilution. I said it earlier and I forgot it was on this slide. And I urge you, don't get hung up on your valuation. I think I have some math in here to show you that. And as a matter of fact, point C, as crazy as this might seem to some people, Often founders are like, oh, I got them to pay this really high valuation. That's so great for me. I get diluted less. It can actually create problems in later rounds that can be worse than having set the dilution a little too low. Yeah, I did put the math in here. So here's a mathematical example that I think is actually really helpful. Valuation often does not mean as much as founders think it does. Not all founders are this way, but some really obsess about it. They will turn down offers from people who could have been great partners, and it's crazy. So if you look at this, if you have a company that's generating 5 million in revenue and you're raising 2.5 million, and you, Mr. Founder, you think that your company should be worth 2 times revenue. It's not, but you think that, and let's just use that as an example. And an investor offers to give you the 2.5 million at 1.5x or a $7.5 million valuation. That's not what I wanted, right? So I feel disappointed as a founder. Assuming that there are 2 founders and they each own 30% of the company, a 1.5x would result in them being diluted down to 22.5%. Whereas getting that 2x valuation that you wanted would result in you getting diluted to 24%. It's almost immaterial. The difference between 1.5x revenue and 2x revenue, which, by the way, is in of itself a material difference. It's a 33% higher valuation, right? 2x versus 1.5x. What does it mean to Mr. or Ms. Founder? Nothing. It's the difference between 22.5% of the company or 24%. Do not risk missing out on an opportunity to get the money you need or to go into business with a firm or a person who could have been a great investor because you're nickel and diming over 1 point of equity. Deal terms. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but I will say that a couple of things quickly. Often early stage companies use convertible notes, or their new modern cousin is the safe stock, to avoid the need to debate and negotiate on valuation and set a price on the round. I urge you to consider that as a last resort and not as your goal. It may sound great on paper, but for a variety of reasons, which I've actually written about and you can find on our website, it was called What's My Valuation? Is a white paper on the Green Circle website. It's greencirclecapital.com that I wrote, that ran as a 3-part series on BevNet and Nosh about 5 years ago. Part 3 was when not to use convertible notes. A convertible note is really most appropriate in a bridge financing. When you're bridging, when you're taking money from existing investors and bridging to a particular thing, an event, an acquisition, a CapEx need, a next equity financing. Early stage companies, where it's very hard to discern what a fair valuation should be, often use convertible notes to get around valuation. You're better served slugging it out with your investors, kicking it around over a beer, and trying to land on a fair number that's in the middle. If you have to use a convertible note, it's not the end of the world. And one thing to know, it changes all the time, but right now, market for a Series A capital raise is probably a 1x liquidation preference on a non-participating preferred stock with an accruing dividend, which might be 6 to 8%. That is probably where I should stop. Tom Malengo has been nodding a little, and I'm getting this psychic sense from him that he wants me to stop rambling. Maybe that's for part 2. Like, what are deal terms for Series A and B? But maybe I should pause here, and it's a good place to wrap up and take your questions.
Well, I was nodding, Stu, because there were a lot of things that we try to share with the brands that we talk to that you were, discussing. And it's nice to get confirmation, even though we've all been doing this a long time. It's nice to get confirmation that others are thinking like you do. We do have a couple of questions in the chat. I have a couple I'd like to get to you, but a couple, and I don't want to call out, if you're looking at the chat, you'll see there's a couple of names of crowdfunding sites in there. But I think the general question is, what about the crowdfunding sites that do a credit facility, revenue share back as part of that? Because there are ones that do that. Is that something what are your thoughts on that?
Well, thank you. First of all, I just want to ask the audience a favor. I just gave you, oh, hell, I almost did talk for 45 minutes. I just gave you a little bit of my time. I want to ask you to do me a favor in return and turn on your cameras. If you don't mind, I'd really love to see who I'm looking at. Oh, thanks. That was awesome. And get to see everybody. It's inspiring if I can get a laugh out of the crowd, or if somebody gives me the finger, I want to know who it is. So to answer Tom's question, friends of mine run one of the biggest reggae crowdfunding businesses in America. They're called Dalmore Group. They're buddies of mine. The honest answer is I don't know a lot about it, Tom. I've been a registered rep for 33 years and used to work on much bigger financings. And even what we do now is much bigger than the kind of stuff that's typically done through crowdfunding. So I wouldn't say that I'm the best expert to answer that question.
Thanks for that. And another question about crowdfunding, and this is one that I generally have a response to, about what future investors might think of crowdfunding. And I'll caveat it with, what I hear from investors is some brands keep going to crowdfunding without putting the disciplines in their business to use money wisely. And that's where investors question the crowdfunding. But if you're doing the other part of it, you're doing the business well, you're using the cash wisely, it's probably not a big deal. But just your thoughts about that as you do invest in later stage brands.
Well, putting on my investor cap for a minute, I could not care less where the money came from. If I meet one of these folks and they had raised money on Brandjectory or some other, crowdfunding site, I don't care. I really wouldn't care. I mean, particularly in the first capital that's non-institutional angel investors, I don't care. I mean, those folks aren't going to have any controls over the governance of the company. Wouldn't bother me a bit. Conversely, I would say in support of, obviously, guys, take my answer in the context of that Tom and Mike and Susan are friends of mine and they invited me here to talk to you. I'm not going to shit on Brandjectory, but I will say that I think it's great. And that when I started raising money for Snow, which was my beverage company, it was 2005. And if you think this is a tough market right now, in those days, 9 out of 10 venture capital firms would not even consider food and beverage. And if you said the word beverage, you just got instantly hung up on. I wish there was a tool like this when I did my thing, because I would have known how to do what I just advised the group to do, which is use it as a tool. And I would have hustled and I would have been able to get leverage out of the tools that in the Brandjectory toolkit that you give to people to use. I think it's great. When you get to a later stage, I see brands sometimes that do crowdfunding deals, and that does seem weird. A $10 or $20 million brand. Sometimes I wonder, did the venture community turn this down? And so maybe that's why they had to turn to less sophisticated capital or something. But if you're talking about an early stage company, no, I don't think there's a problem. I do like with some of these folks, and I don't even know how Brandjectory does this, so I'm certainly not being favorable to them. If they aggregate investors and it comes in through one LLC and it's just one name on the cap table, I think that's kind of cool. For what I think Brandjectory does, if you're reaching out to kind of high net worth individuals, small VCs, you know, that's exactly who I want you to be soliciting. And whether you met them on your own or you met them through Tom, who cares? That's, am I answering your question?
Yeah, I think you are. I mean, I just wanted your thoughts on that. It's something that I think a lot of companies ask about. Brands do go to crowdfunding at different times, and I think it's better. I personally believe it's better earlier. As you say, you know, when you're just trying to get started, it's the equivalent of friends and family in many ways. You know, you're bringing folks in, and you know, you're getting your business off the ground and started. And my
Let
only
me,
concern,
sure. Oh, sorry. No, I
no,
didn't
go
mean to
ahead.
cut you off. Oh, I was just going to say, let me just add one other thing, which is, look, all these folks, I assume, are on Brandjectory, or maybe there's a few who haven't joined up yet and they're thinking about it. So it's not like I'm, I'm talking to the audience now. It's not like I'm trying to convince you. I assume you're already on there. But yes, I agree with Tom. I think it's a great tool for early stage companies because, again, if it's not going to, save you from doing the heavy lifting, right? But if you're prepared to hustle and work hard like an entrepreneur, this is a great tool to have because with the people that you already know or the friends of your friends who I've been urging you to try to reach out to, I think it professionalizes your process and it shows that you have your act together. You have materials, you're working with partners that are professionalized. I think it can only create a little bit of a halo on a very early stage company. And for the folks that you don't know, it gives you an opportunity to broaden the net, right? Because you will. I mean, I know that Brandjectory has been successful, in raising capital for many of the companies that have come through the platform. So while I still think that, relationship is the number one thing and it's critical, it doesn't mean that you can't augment your network with some, a few folks that you'll meet for the first time on Brandjectory, right?
That's correct. We have a question in here, Stu. I can read it out loud. It's from Cheryl at Newts. We have 250 stores and cafes, but need to buy machines to scale up. Is it better to seek loans for that machine or wait to raise from private investors when our sales have increased?
Can Cheryl unmute and wave? Oh, I see you, Cheryl. Hi there.
Hi.
Are you saying that you sell machines?
No, in order to scale up and significantly increase sales, we need a factory line. So we're doing things far too labor intensively right now. And so we know what we need to purchase. And I'm wondering if it would be better to look for loans for the machinery and then look for investment after that machinery has helped us to increase our sales.
Gotcha. But what you make is, what is it that you sell?
We make superfood smoothie packs. So they're frozen, blend and go raw whole food smoothies.
Got it. First of all, very cool. I love that. And for the group, I have not eaten meat since Ronald Reagan was in the White House. There's a reason I got into the natural products. I know what you're thinking. No way, this guy can't be a day over 29. I get that all the time. No one ever laughs at that joke. But this is an answer that is more broad than your question, which is, first of all, can you get a loan to buy equipment? Yes, you can get equipment lease financing. I would imagine that Tom and Mike have some contacts for that. And if not, they could ping me and I'll help. It's harder when you're very new, which it sounds like you are. But the big thing that I want to say to you and to everyone is, this is a really big point, which I'm always advising young brands on. Go deep in your distribution, not broad, right? The biggest thing that you need to do, everyone on this call, if you sell a CPG item or if you sell a food or beverage product to stores, you need to build your unit velocity at the store level, not how many stores you're in, and not surprisingly, your revenue. Because I'll tell you what I say all the time is, if you give me a brand that's doing 5 million in revenue, but they're only in 1,000 stores and it's turning like crazy, I'll get them a blank check. If you show me a $15 million brand, but the velocity is mediocre and it's already in 35,000 stores, I can't raise money for them. And they're actually on their way out of business, although nobody's going to know it for a year or two. So, you know, for you right now, to buy equipment or for whatever your use of funds is, the important thing is to strengthen your story for raising capital by building sales. How many units you could sell at each location is more important than how much you can sell in total. I hope that's helpful. It's not exactly what you were asking.
Yeah, it is. We have been in business for a few years, and we do have certain stores that perform really well. Can we, do we have to always show an average, or can we say, look, in this demographic area, we can sell like, 30, 40 cases a month, and then extrapolate that to what would happen if we go national, because we're just a regional brand right now?
Well, now you're from my job. So that's pretty good. So the answer is, salesmen get a bad rap. I've been a salesman my whole life. The goal of sales is to tell the truth, but hey, can you pull the shade down so this isn't behind me? The goal of sales is to tell the truth, but to do it in the most attractive way. So you can present your data on, velocity or on anything, however you like, to highlight it in the best light, but you just have to be careful, and you don't want to be accused of cherry picking to be misleading, right? So how you do that is a little bit more nuanced, and that's why people hire me sometimes. It might be that you're showing both, like here's an average of all the stores, but here's also a snapshot of in certain types of stores or certain, communities with certain demographics, where we've performed incredibly well. And then the extrapolation is, what would it look like pro forma if we went into 1,000 more of those, right? And sure, that's perfectly okay to illustrate. You just have to do it within context. For what it's worth, consumer investors, less so with angels, but universally with professionals, they're not just interested in sales data about velocity, they're obsessed with it. It is the number 1, 2, and 3 most important metric. And what smart and experienced folks will do, and these days most of them are, is they're going to want to see the raw data, so that there's not only is there no cherry picking, there isn't even any segmenting. When I look at a brand to decide, do I want to represent them, what I ask for is the raw data at the SKU level, including promoted versus non-promoted sales. Because then I can see what's really going on. Every single product, each SKU, how many units per store per week is that thing selling? And is it all just because they're giving it away, buy one, get one free, or because they're really selling it? So I think you have to be prepared to defend all the data, but you can certainly show highlights. Why don't we move on and see if anybody else has a question?
Stu, I have
Thank
a
you.
comment. This is Michelle from Bloom, and I love data, and I agree with you. And right or wrong, early stages, I invested in spins because I think that's the best way to sell, and to your point, provide evidence to what you're saying. However, it's really, really expensive. So, and most stores don't share their data. Fortunately, if you're in Whole Foods, you can go in and get your own data and do your analysis. But I think it's really hard early on when you're getting started to get that data. And I just share that because now there are plenty of people out there, right? Trying to sell maybe more cost-effective data. And it's not only good, to your point, to demonstrate valid velocities, but also it's great for targeting what to get in places for low performers. So I think it's hard early on with the, because it's hard to access that velocity data.
Yeah, agreed. So what did you do? Did you come up with a solution?
Early on, I actually had a friend in the industry that shared data when I was building my initial business model. So
you shouldn't say that on a recorded line. Did you do anything else? Michelle, I always assume whoever doesn't have their camera on, it's 50-50 they're with the NSA if they're keeping an eye on me. So.
I love it. Well, and then as I mentioned, I did early on make, well over a $20,000 investment in 1 year. So I had it because we were,
okay. Well, let me try to respond. Michelle's asking an awesome question, actually, that I think is spot on for this audience, as I understand its makeup. There's stuff you can do. So first of all, yeah, real spins data is expensive, and their competitors are as well, IRI and Nielsen, which are probably less relevant to this group than spins anyway. But some people are suggesting stuff in the chat. That's cool. But in addition, as Michelle said, the Whole Foods portal has a ton of data. So if you're lucky enough to get into a division or two or global with Whole Foods, that's one solution. The trick with Whole Foods is that it is one of the half a dozen or so brand building accounts that I think are the most important ones to try to land. But, you're going to generate velocity at Whole Foods that is not replicable at any other chain in America, and investors know that. So you can't really just rely on Whole Foods data. Just sharing a couple of random points with you. But what can you do if you can't afford data and you're only in a few hundred or 1,000 or 2 stores? There are anecdotal ways to create directional data that I would still look at. So if you're only in a few hundred stores, and it might be mostly natural independents that you're hitting through UNFI and KeHE, you might be able to create your own sort of velocity synopsis on your own. In addition, the difference between true sales data, or what we call consumption data, and sell-in data is that one is reactive, one's proactive. So sell-in data, what you sell to the distributor or directly to the retailer, does not demonstrate true strength of the brand, because that product might end up given to a food bank or thrown out, or we have no idea where it went. Some of it might end up returned to you. Only true scanner data or consumption data or sell-through data matters to investors. Now, that said, the smaller your business, the more that you can manage a data set, and you can certainly draw directional correlations between sell-in and sell-through. So even though it's true that if I'm a small brand and I'm selling to stores, that not all of it got sold through to consumers, most of it probably did. So if you can't afford to get your hands on sell-through data, I would still try to do an analysis of, here's how many stores we're in, here's how many cases we sold per store this month, and show them what the trend is, right, over a 12-month period or whatever you have, and footnote it and be very transparent and say, we didn't have spins data. It's very expensive. If you guys want to get it and share it with me, that'd be wonderful, Mr. Investor. But what I do have is sell-in data that, while imperfect, is directionally important and will show you that we're growing. That's a solution that I often see small brands use that I think is good, and that it is a tool. Are there other questions? Well, thank you to whoever put, to Lynn Wilford Scarborough. Mike, are there other questions?
Well, there was one in the chat about the three most important metrics: velocity and what else?
I already said velocity, velocity, and velocity. But if you're going to shake me down, and if you're going to hold a gun to my head, I would say velocity is most important. And again, don't bullshit them, and don't get into a debate about data if you don't know what you're talking about. Learn a little bit about sales data and consumption data. There's a direct correlation between experienced folks in the food and beverage industry who understand data and the CEOs who end up succeeding. It's really important. I urge you to learn a little bit. That'd probably be a great thing for Brandjectory to do, and bring in some spins people. You've probably already done it. Oh my goodness. What was the question, Mike? Oh, the top three metrics.
I'm going to ask a different question related back to the pitch. I often get asked and see plenty of pitches that include two elements that I think I'd love to hear your perspective on. One is when a founder is in the startup stage under $500,000 and is talking about an exit to a big CPG for a big multiple in the billions. And secondly, on the ask slide, identifying not just the amount of money they want to raise and the use of funds, but also starting to put in terms in the instrument as well.
Right. So these are rhetorical questions?
No, you got to answer.
Does anyone in the audience not know what Mike is trying to get out of me? Raise your hand. So yes, if you have a business that's generating a few $100 grand or $1 million in revenue, talking in your deck about how you're going to make billions for the investors probably seems unrealistic, if not arrogant. I don't like it. What was the second part?
The information that would be on the ask slide. Yeah.
Terms. Yeah, absolutely. I recommend not even speaking to valuation. There's no reason to discuss terms in a deck. The valuation is the negotiation. The terms are secondary, and it's putting the cart way before the horse to get into that in a deck. I don't know if you guys would agree, but that's my view. Let me go back to the metrics question, because I do want to speak to it, actually. I had a little senior moment there. So velocity is key, and you should learn about velocity and understand that the only important, velocity data is SKU level, right? And also, when you're looking at consumption data, the big question you have to, two big questions you have to ask yourself is it promoted versus unpromoted? Because if I'm selling stuff at 40% off, that doesn't mean I can sell as many units when it's not 40% off. The other big thing is, when did it go into distribution? Consumption data is really tricky for small or growth stage brands. The quick way of explaining this is, if you look at a 52-week period in spins, the number of stores that's in the denominator when they come up with a units per store per week number for you, the number of stores that goes into the denominator is defined by any store that scanned a single unit during the entire time period. So if you went into distribution in January, but there was a store that cut it into their store in December, 11 months, they did not even carry the product, but now they're bringing down your velocity number. So you need to always present data with context and be careful about, if you were going into a distribution build that was over a few months with a particular retailer, you might need to carve that out of the data. What the hell was I going to say? Okay, I forgot. But the other two big metrics that I want you to think about after velocity, the most important thing is gross margin. Okay, nobody expects you to be making a profit in a food or beverage company, if you're at $500,000 in sales, frankly, to generate a profit at 10 million is not really easy. Okay. But your gross margin tells me, is there a chance for me to make a profit with this business? You know, is there enough in the gross margin that when it gets to scale, that bottom line margin will start to look attractive to the next set of investors and or potential acquirers? Now, when you're really subscale, your gross margin is going to look terrible. And it's also going to be extremely lumpy and variable. It's going to go up or down wildly from month to month. That's okay. Just show them what it is. But then also, you want to project out what is our gross margin pro forma if it wasn't for this crazy thing that happened last month where I lost some ingredients or whatever. Okay. And then the big thing, the big question to investors in companies like this is, at a reasonable scale at 10, 20 million, what is the gross margin that's possible here? By the way, you need to really understand this question as well, just like velocity data. Velocity data, you need to know, who do you compare to? What does their data look like? What do their number of turns look like? Same thing in gross margin. If you make a baking mix, and the biggest, most successful baking mix companies in the country are only in the mid to high 20s, claiming that your gross margin is going to be 40% isn't really believable, right? So you want to understand the category you're in, what's possible. But in answer to Mike's original question, velocity most critical, gross margin really critical. Now, does it matter that you make a profit? I come from this weird part of the world where we actually thought that a business is supposed to make money. Apparently, this became a very unusual, crazy idea in recent years. I think one person smiled out of like 30. Thank you, Lynn Wilford Scarborough. But anyway, you don't have to be profitable if you're a subscale food or beverage company. But investors more than ever are really focused on what we call path to profitability. So I urge you to think about, what does it take in terms of scale for this business to start getting into the black and no longer be consuming investor cash to survive, and then demonstrate in what I might call a bridge. What is your bridge to profitability, right? Show them, we're not profitable today because at this scale, a cupcake company cannot be profitable, right? That's fine. But at 9 million in revenue, we cross into the black, and here's how we're going to get there. I think that's really important. How many of you, by a show of raising your hands, think this is the greatest webinar ever given by Brandjectory? Let's raise our hands. I don't want to pick on anybody, but Hannah. Okay, thank you, Hannah. Okay, all right. I'll think of another question. Mike, any others? Final question. Double Jeopardy.
Anybody? Feel free. Okay.
Stu,
Well, Stu, this. Oh, go ahead.
Stu, I have a question.
Stu?
We're in a video world. What do you think about using short videos, testimonials within a pitch, etc.?
Well, you're asking two questions. What do I think about using video in a pitch? Bad idea. Having video in assets that are accessible to you to share later, great idea if it's good. You know, I read a book on marketing once. The whole book I read, I got one great idea, the same way I was asking you to hopefully come out of today's session with. And their idea, I forgot the name of the guy who wrote it. It was genius. His phrase was remarkable content. And he said, publish as often as possible, but only when you have something truly remarkable. Because you don't want to turn into white noise, right? But if you have something truly remarkable, share it as often as possible. I think if you can make video assets that are great, that's a great thing to have. No, I would not share it in a pitch. I think that you should be having a conversation. But the other part of your question was testimonials. has anybody ever seen a testimonial that said something negative? I don't buy testimonials. Whether other investors do, I'm not sure, but I don't think that's the most compelling part of what could be your story, because, obviously, when I always find it strange when people ask for references, I mean, sure, I guess there's a chance that you're one day going to ask that of a service provider who says, I don't have any, no one will say anything nice about me. But the rest of us, we got a couple of people that we paid off in a bar that we could convince to say, hey, he's actually a decent guy. Like, there are no bad references and there are no bad testimonials. I don't think that's going to be the part that, of your story or your pitch that is the winner.
I just want to point out that something Stu mentioned earlier about creating FOMO and urgency. We asked if there were any more questions, and suddenly we got questions. So just to prove his point accurate. Eric, did you have a question?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Tom. And I'm going to get back to you on that email set up for a meeting soon. The question is, Stu, do you know Elliot Began?
No.
Okay. He has a group called TIG Group, startup company for helping small companies grow. The concept, the very basic concept in his group is focus on profitability, especially in this environment. Create a strong foundation in the company in that way, and then weather the valley of death kind of concept. He also has a concept adjacent to that says look for investors in a way that's tied to your profitability. So gross margin or EBITDA, or at some level on the P&L where you're showing your strength and have them participate with some return based on that profit. There's probably a better way to describe that than me, but have you heard of this concept, and how does it fit anywhere in your thinking?
It does not. The first part I strongly agree with. Talk about making a business, not a charity, right? And having a value proposition that could lead to profitability, really important. And yes, as you said correctly, I think, Eric, and especially in this environment, yeah, it's amazing. Actually, I'm raising capital for a growth stage brand right now that is on fire. Everything is going so well, and it's very hard because they're not yet profitable. They're going to turn profitable next year. It's a pretty decent sized business. It's interesting to me how many investors would have jumped on this a couple of years ago, and now they're saying to me they're using the word profitability as the reason that they're passing. So I think that's really important. As far as demonstrating a potential return, I think you're talking about what could be a tool for a different industry, but not for this one. It could be very reasonable to have an investment proposition where getting distributions or clipping coupons is part of your return. In the food and beverage industry, and I don't know if there are other industries represented here today, but it's just, you're just not going to build a business that's going to be substantially profitable until a few years have gone in, some money has gone in, some time has gone by, and you've gotten to some scale. So it'd be disingenuous to suggest that there's going to be any opportunity to return distributions in the near future. So I don't think that should be part of the proposition. I think the proposition should be, we have an opportunity to create great value. How we'll create liquidity later is like any other industry. We could sell the company. We could someday theoretically go public if we really hit it out of the park. But I don't think that suggesting that you're going to be able to make distributions in the early years would really make sense for a food or a beverage company.
Well, that was my take on it, without having the experience you have or anybody in the screen. But yeah, I appreciate your response. That was
Just
That's
one
where we're
guy's
at.
opinion.
Yeah, that's-
And look,
no,
I want
it's
to
kind of
wrap up.
reality for us, but yeah.
I want to wrap up by saying this. Just remember, when you're talking to investors, they're people too, and you have to, step into their shoes and also be empathetic. And just remember, don't judge a person until you walk a mile in their shoes. You've heard this expression. And remember, once you do, if you then look back and say, that guy really was a jerk after all, well, at least you're a mile away and you have the guy's shoes, right?
Yeah.
No, Roberta didn't like that.
Thank you.
All right.
All right.
I'm
We
going to
are
work on
going
my
to-
material between now and part 2.
No, you close with a big joke. I like that. That's the way it should be. You close with the winner and leave them. Mike, drop the mic and go home. So, hey, Stu, thank you so much. I want to thank everyone for being here today. If you have questions about any of this, the recording will be out soon. If you have any questions about this, reach out to Michael and myself. And if you have questions for Stu, we can get those to him. Tom at brandjectory.com, Michael at brandjectory.com. Easy to get a hold of us and easy to find us. And Michael, anything else in closing?
Pitch Slam applications are open for the next couple of weeks.
Yep, and we're running up a big prize package. It's going to be bigger than last year, so we look forward to those who are on the platform being part of it, and those who aren't, maybe you'll join us and have a chance for it. Stu, thank you so much. Always appreciate your
Thanks,
time.
everybody.
Talking to you. We'll
Thanks.
look to keep including you in maybe part 2 for Series A.
Okay, thanks so much for having me, everybody. I'll also close real quickly on a serious note. I used to be a professional musician, and when that didn't work out, I became an entrepreneur. That didn't work out. I finally found a way I could make a living. But I will say that trying to be an entrepreneur and build your own company, I always said that's the second coolest thing anyone can ever try to do, second only to rock star. So you're going to hear so many naysayers and so many people tell you the problems and the challenges, and you're going to face so many challenges, and many of you are not going to succeed, but it's still totally worth doing. And I wish you all a great deal of luck, and thanks for listening today.
Thank you, Stu.
Thank you, Stu.
Yeah.
Thanks everyone
Thanks a
for being
lot.
here.
Thanks a
Bye-bye.
lot.
Take care, everybody.
Bye-bye.
See you
Thank
soon.
you.
Bye-bye.